Okay, Crystal, next slide, please. Item 2 on the agenda is in-kind reporting. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings, activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know now. Okay, thank you. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable for the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will be automatically calculated with the time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. Thank you. Next slide, please. I think that before we proceed, I'd like to go ahead and just complete a quick roll call. I'm going to start on my list. Mark Hoffman.
Present.
Mick Jensen. Robin Rain.
Present.
Thank you. Jason Bahi. Catherine Skinner.
Present.
Patricia Pablo. Dan Grossman.
Present.
Thank you. Jose Rodriguez.
Present.
And Gallo.
Present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3.
Oh, Scott Grobler, Tucson Airport Authority is also present.
Thank you, Scott. Is there anyone else that I've missed? Okay, thank you. So now we move on to agenda item 3, review and programming recommendation for available fiscal year 22 Surface Transportation Block Grant, or STBG, funding for federal funds pursuant to the June 25th, 2001 Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll just complete a quick overview of the NOFA. I released the supplemental NOFA on June 25th, 2001, and it contained attached memos describing our regional funding policies. $1,674,000 of State Transportation Block Grant, or STBG, program funding is available through the Highway Infrastructure Program, or HIP. We also have additional funding available through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, also known as CRRSA, funding which will be covered in the next agenda item. The deadline for this request was July 19th. Programming for regional STBG funds must continue to prioritize the delivery of RTA projects as directed by PAG Regional Council and pledged by the RTA Board. Therefore, only RTA projects are eligible for supplemental funding through the supplemental NOFA. Preference is given to projects which are already federalized and that can use the available funding quickly. The TIP subcommittee is asked to recommend to the Transportation Planning Committee the programming of supplemental fiscal year 21 federal STBG funding for Regional Transportation Authority projects, which meets regional priorities and is eligible for the supplemental funding. Only one request was submitted for available funding. Next slide, please. The request was submitted by Catherine Skinner for tip number 18.18, Sunset Road, I-10 to River Road. The request was for STBG fundings in the amount of $1,674,000 for construction year FY 2020. The project descriptions and narrations can be seen in attachment C of your agenda item. Today, I would like to request that the TIP subcommittee reviews the project for the eligibility considerations as outlined in the NOFA. 1, the item was an existing RTA roadway element project. 2, Supplemental funding is needed to complete the project. 3, the project is federalized, meaning it already meets the standards that's already been approved from federalized dollars. And 4, has an active IGA for design.
Excuse me, Carolyn, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may, Dave.
This is for STBG, not CRISA?
That's correct. Yep, I did notice that there was an issue with the flag that with the slide, but I do believe I mentioned it was for STBG.
Just wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. PAG staff would like to open this time for any questions for the applicant or for me. Do you have any questions?
This is Robin. I just have one question, and that is this enough to construct the entire project?
Catherine, would you please respond?
It is not enough to construct the entire project. We have applications in for the next item, which will be the CRISA funding. And we've also applied for a RAISE grant for more federal funding. And then of course the other NOFA that came out for RTA funding. So we're putting as many requests out to complete the funding needed for construction as possible. Our hope, of course, as I'm sure most of you know, is to get the funding lined up so that we can partner with ADOT to get it constructed as a project and have some savings because they're doing the GAP project at the same time.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Robin again. I feel as though not having the complete discussion with all the other funding sources at the same time is going to make this decision-making process a little complicated. I mean, clearly you've got, this one on the 2 list. We've got a couple on the other list. We didn't ask for any additional funding for other large projects because none of them are currently federalized, but there's just a lot of different funding sources, and most of, especially the large projects like this one, are going to need multiple funding sources, and it's very difficult to discuss this one funding source at a time, in my opinion. Is anyone else having that difficulty?
I would agree. I mean, this is a challenge and it feels like a different process. Even looking ahead to the next item, it sounds like it goes to a different committee after TIP than the STPG. So,
Catherine, can you tell us a little more about this project? I mean, what's the funding sources? What's the gap? And are you getting ready to construction? And when do you anticipate on the construction?
sure. So it's an RTA project, a named project. So primarily we have RTA funding and we have some 12-6 that's acting, supplanting the RTA funding to do the design. We're following the federal process. We've been, has the grade separation with the UPRR. We've already worked with them and gotten some initial clearances to move forward with that design. And then it has the additional bridge over the Rito, so it connects up to River Road. The construction funding is kind of, we're trying to fill in that gap right now. We have design and right-of-way covered. We have some impact fees that are still owed by the county for this project. I know the city had a commitment to some additional impact fees through the original RTA plan, but the RTA funding itself is very insufficient for constructing this project. We are on track to have it authorized for construction this spring, 2022 spring.
Okay, thank you for that information, Catherine. So just as a quick reminder, this section of the NOFA was specifically for projects that met the intent of the RTA board, that was federalized and could use the funding very quickly. And that also includes that there was an active IGA. So this was the only project that was submitted for this funding, and it does meet the standards that were requested in the NOFA.
I have one more question. Is this primarily for design, or because I understood this STPG was for just this fiscal year that we're currently in?
It's for fiscal year 22 was the request, and it was for construction funding. And I believe that the project will begin construction during this fiscal year.
Right, we're planning on authorizing it for construction at the end of fiscal year 22. So that is the year that we want the construction funding, but it's not for the design phase. This funding would be for the construction phase.
So the NEPA is complete?
Very nearly. We just got our local project number from ADOT. We were waiting until the most recent TIP amendment went through that showed that there was actual federal money for the construction on it so that we could have a TRAX number assigned and get that final approval. But the EA is complete. We followed all the processes thus far, so we're just waiting for that approval.
And would you be able to request funding if the rest of the funding sources don't come through? I mean, would you still advertise for construction if the total amount isn't already programmed?
I think that's a challenge we'll have to face when we get there. Our hope, of course, is to find enough funding to advertise for construction this spring.
Yeah, I would so prefer to discuss all of the funding sources in a meeting like this so that we could ensure these projects are actually completely funded.
Carolyn, as the chair, is that something you can discuss, how we can ensure that the TIP is being programmed in a way that we do have projects funded in those first 2 years for policy?
So I think that that's a question I'm going to ask perhaps Jamie Brown to respond to. It is my understanding that with the TIP that was just completed, we programmed every project to the ballot amount as outlined by the RTA commitment to the voters. And any additional funding that's offered to the region and PAG RTA wants to make those dollars available to complete those projects. So when funding was available, that became available through the STBG grant, our goal was to release the funding and make it available to the region as soon as possible. Jamie, would you like to?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. And maybe I should just clarify, if you don't mind, Ms. Skinner, kind of restating your question. I think it's about having a discussion of all the different funding sources all at one time. So kind of changing, what we had outlined for today. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think it's to have more clarity if we're taking action on this item and adding more funding to a project that's in the first 2 years of the TIP. Ordinarily, we want to make sure those projects are fully funded to be delivered. And right now we're in a position where we can't exactly say that that's the case because we're doing this in a very piecemeal fashion with all the NOFAs that have come out. So how do we get that confidence on our side as the committee that this is the right action to take?
Right. Well, that's a great question. I mean, if it's something that there's uncertainty about whether or not there would be sufficient funding to obligate this and enter the construction phase, then maybe it's something we need to take back and regroup on. That said, if it's something that you feel like you pursued this funding thinking that you would be able to assemble the necessary funds to enter the construction phase, we could take action. If there's a motion, action could be taken today. And as it moves through the process, we could revisit how we can have a bigger discussion as a committee. This particular fund source only had one application, and that application seemed to meet all the criteria in the NOFA. So, however, if there's not agreement among this committee for a recommendation, then we'll just move on to the next item. But with that, I'd like to also defer to the deputy directors in the room, Dave Adler and Jim DeGroote, to see if they have a different perspective on this. Thank you.
I think one issue that we face with this is that the deadline for obligation. It has to be obligated by when? The end of next month, Jamie? So if we don't have the conversation soon, we may not be able to have the conversation if you're asking to hold up these the awards of funds until all funds are available. We don't know what's going on with the next federal bill. We won't know that till October. So then we start to lose funds from the region.
So, so that piques my interest. So this has to be authorized by next month?
I think we should maybe,
That's what I'm asking Jamie, is this these federal funds have to be obligated by the end of this, the federal fiscal year?
I don't believe, by the end of this is for fiscal year 22. Nathan, do you mind chiming in on this, please? I don't believe it has to be obligated by next month, but maybe you could clarify, please.
These are fiscal year 22 funds. So we do have until spring to get them obligated. ADOT has a soft deadline, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they have a soft deadline that they want these types of funds to be authorized by, I want to say March or April-ish, so that then they've got plenty of wiggle room and time to work it through the rest of the federal process. So soft deadline, spring of calendar year 22.
And if I may, I'm not trying to say in any way that we as the county don't want to move forward with these funds on our project. It's more a big picture of this is a newer process that we're going through with the piecemeal approach. And so that's just added complications on our part. I feel like it's the TIP subcommittee to have the same level of confidence in how we're programming funds. So that was really more, that was more the gist of my question rather than.
You're not withdrawing your application?
And we will be making a motion. I don't know. I mean, this is a different process, and maybe you can shed light on why we're using a different process this year.
I'm neither trying to say that we shouldn't try to put this money on appropriate project. I'm just saying, like Catherine is, that this is so complicated of a new process, and I would feel a little anxious not having all of the money associated with the project be enough money to do the construction.
So I would like to just respond to this question. It's my understanding that our PEG goal was to release the funding NOFA as quickly as possible. We, as you all remember, we just recently completed the FY 22 to 26 TIP. And so we, once we completed that process, we wanted to release these funds, this NOFA, as quickly as possible and make it available to the region so there wouldn't be any concern about the funds lapsing in the future. So that was a decision that was made because we wanted you to move forward on your projects. And we wanted to hear from the region and from, starting with our TIP subcommittee, what the best use of these funds were. So that's my understanding of why we opted to move forward quickly with this. And are there any other questions for me on this item?
Carolyn, I do have one additional question.
Yes.
If for some reason we can't get all of the ducks in a row, is there a possibility of this funding going away? What happens to it if we can't get a program?
So it is our practice that we attempt to keep every dollar available for the region. We don't want to lose anything. And that's been something that I've learned since my first day here at PAG was we got to keep all the money local. There are some issues that we have towards the end of the year, but our goal through this NOFA process is to get the funding programmed as quickly as possible.
That's my understanding. There's a lot too with federal dollars are time sensitive. So you got to act on it right away.
Right. And of course, we at the county have been through this every single year trying to meet that deadline. So.
And, that was one of the items that we decided to clearly include in the NOFA was that we wanted to see projects that already met that federal guideline requirement. So,
Just
county.
like the ARROW funds, you get all this money, but then they give you a very small window. You got to get them authorized, obligated, very short period of time.
And this funding is actually aligned with the schedule we had already. So we're not accelerating from what our plan was already. So everything is on track. at this point to meet the deadlines.
I think the shortfall still of funds, right? You guys just,
Well, I have a loaded question for you, Catherine. Based on the, be careful here, the other NOFAs that are out, the other applications that have come in, do you feel that the gap will be closed to be able to fully fund this project?
I mean, I can't make that determination because I have no idea what's been submitted for those other NOFAs besides the CRISA.
I'm sorry. So if you were awarded your,
Sure, we applied for enough funding to cover our entire gap.
great, thank you.
don't know what we're talking about. You're talking about the next one.
And the RTA. And the RTA.
TA funding. And so,
Are you within
But-
striking this as basically?
I think that's kind of not aligned with this agenda item. I mean, that is the gist of why we brought up this issue, is how do we make this call?
Mhm.
Looking at all of them at once would allow us to do that, but we're not doing that.
So I think today, I'm sorry, excuse me, today we're looking for a recommendation to the Transportation Planning Committee.
I just have one final question.
Yes.
Sorry, and I lost track because, but
Doug, I see your hand. We'll get to you next. Thank you.
oh, sorry, I can't find the hand raising thing here, so I just keep popping in. That makes this difficult. All right, so the last question I actually have on this is about overall funding for the region and TPC. And I think I saw in this agenda that we will be looking at this item next in the TPC. And the question I have is, will all the rest of the NOFAs be discussed in that same TPC so we can look at them all together at once in that meeting to start to understand whether or not each of these projects that are being requested in each of the NOFAs is fully funded, because that is super important. And I know we don't have one on this item, but we do have a rather large request on the RTA one, and I'm not sure that allows for enough funding for Sunset if we get ours and that one's already under construction. So I have some real trepidation about not having a comprehensive conversation, and would feel better to know that we were having a comprehensive conversation at the TPC.
Okay, and let me see if I can put together a response on that. So the NOFA that we're discussing today, there were 4 requirements for the first element that we're discussing, our agenda item 3. One was that an IGA was in place for the project. So that having the ability to show that we have an IGA helps PAG, and so because it's already been through some review process, it's already been through the regional council. And so our goal again with this one is really just kind of pulling back to our basic agenda item is we would like to fund, we'd like your recommendation on funding a project that meets the standards of the NOFA. And one of those was the IGA. Projects that have an IGA can move forward for discussion at the TPC. And projects that do not have an IGA need to follow a different process. I hope that answers your question, Robin. Doug, would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And my question, I guess, relates to if the recommendation occurs out of the committee today, and there's partial funding, and we get to the March deadline that's identified, and unfortunately there's not enough funding for the entire construction, is there a process in place to be able to address then where this funding would be able to go to be able to stay within the region? As you said, I mean, are we just a little at risk?
Well, I believe that PAG would do everything that we could to keep those dollars locally funding. I guess, Jamie, would you like to?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Lori, Mr. Wozecki, and Nathan Barrett too, if you want to please chime in. But once we get into the spring and it looks like we do not have the ability to obligate those funds, we do try to find other ways in which we make sure we do not lose any funding to the region. So that might be coordinating with ADOT to see if there's any way we can do some exchanges of funds to refresh the funding so we get an extra fiscal year or something like that. If there's a need for an ADOT project to use those funds immediately, there could be a way to use it for our overall work program if there's capacity there to program. So yeah, we do have mechanisms in place, and it may be something too where we would have a different process in the spring as well, where we would work with our committees. But like Carolyn said, we will do everything we can to make sure we don't lose any money to the region. So, but Nathan, with your historical perspective on this, do you mind chiming in, please?
Yeah, we as an organization, as a region, we've done a very good job in the past in making sure that we haven't lost those funds. That worst case scenario has never come to pass. Part of that is the excellent working relationship we have with ADOT. Part of that is the collaborative process we have with the jurisdictions. But as Jamie noted, we do have mechanisms that are less ideal than going through a collaborative process like we are doing right now. So there are mechanisms. We will be able to find a home for those funds, but I think the preference for PAG, the preference for ADOT, I think the preference for the jurisdictions in the region is to get those funds programmed through a collaborative process like this, rather than through one of those emergency mechanisms later in the fall or summer.
So I'm sorry, I can't find the hand raising thing anywhere. So I'm just going to pop in, and I apologize to all of you for doing this. But the one question that I would really like to ask again, because I didn't quite hear a comprehensive answer to that. I really need to know how a comprehensive conversation about the fully funded projects will happen. And I asked initially if that will happen at TPC, but if that's not where it's going to happen, can someone please describe to me what the process is going to be to have those comprehensive conversations in a group setting to ensure completion of all the funding so these projects can be assured to be programmed fully in the first 2 years?
Okay. So there are additional funding sources that will be released. There'll be discussions about the RTA NOFA, the current tip that we have now. We were meeting all the ballot amounts. That was one of the main goals in getting that completed. And it's my understanding that as a region, our goal is to program these dollars as quickly as possible. And I cannot speak to the additional discussions happening because really we're focused on the PEG side of the house in this discussion. RTA funding will be discussed in a different program process.
Can you describe how that RTA funding will be discussed?
I think that if Jim DeGrood is available, are you in the room, Jim?
Yeah, I'm in the room.
Thank you.
We will begin the process with a CART subcommittee meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for the 24th of this month. As we firm things up, we'll make sure that everybody knows about them. After that, it'll go to the broader CART and be discussed, and it will be up to the CART, our citizens committee, to help guide us with the process going forward into as far as how the RTA dollars, which are different than, it's a completely different process. So we'll be going through that process with them to look at the allocation of additional RTA funds. At this point in time, we've got about $47 million worth of requests. We received or we put out an RF, or rather a NOFA for $30 million basically. So that's what we're looking at the moment.
Excuse me, Jim, what was that date for the CART?
The CART would be the CART subcommittee meeting would be the 24th. And I would also add that any money that is applied to the, because of the duplicative nature of the requests from the county for the Sunset Project, any funds that are programmed through this would diminish the amount of funding requests that the county has for RTA funds.
So the CART committee recommendations will go next to where?
We will talk to the CART about the process that they want to follow, making some recommendations, but it's the CART to make recommendations to the board. It's not staff.
But we don't know if there's going to be a comprehensive conversation at any body between here and the regional council. So you're going to expect the mayors to have a firm understanding of how exactly the funding sources all fit together.
We will be providing that information as it develops over time. I don't have a comprehensive answer for you at this point. But it's going to be dependent upon what the CART wishes to recommend to the RTA board.
So just to clarify, so that you're going to be working with the RTA CART to develop a new process for the NOFA requests for RTA money?
They will be reviewing the requests made and make a recommendation. What it takes to get that recommendation will be to them to make that determination. If they want to work with the TMC on it, they may ask questions of TMC. They may seek additional information from jurisdictions on the specifics of the project requests. It's really to them to make that call.
So they will be developing criteria on how to prioritize which projects move forward, how we allocate the funding, the requests.
They will be reviewing the requests that have been made, yes.
So if we have a project under construction and it's got funding requested of RTA and they say no, do we stop construction then?
You're asking a question that I can't answer.
Well, that's the thing. This is the body that I would normally expect to be able to answer those questions, because we have needs in this RTA plan that go beyond the ballot amounts in order to deliver the projects. And I'm struggling to understand how this process helps us deliver the plan. I'm just, someone tell me how this process is going to help us get the plan delivered beyond ballot amounts. I don't want to discuss ballot amounts because clearly we've got a lot of these. Sunset is the first one to come up, but clearly it's not the last, that need more than the ballot to deliver.
Yeah. Well, they will be making a recommendation to the RTA board, which will be ultimately the deciding body. But I think it's in everybody's interest in this room, to see that we all get every project funded. How we go about it, we'll be working through the process and the details.
Jim, can I ask, has the CART committee been used previously to make funding recommendations for the RTA, or is this the
We've
first
not
time?
had a request to exceed the ballot amount previously. So, that at least not through CART or through RTA funding. So, this is uncharted territory to some extent. We'll be working through it together. And at this point in time, our first step is to get the CART informed of what the issues are and allow them to start having some input on the process. So that's the process. That's the way we're going forward with it. And I hope this is enough information. I can't give you much more detail than that at this time. And I think we're kind of straying from the agenda item description anyway, so I would be, it would be inappropriate for me to go further than that. I'm certainly happy to talk to folks after the meeting and discuss it as well. So you're welcome to give me a call.
Thank you, Jim. And with that, I wondered if we could, take this opportunity to circle back to the agenda item. And as I'm acting chair, I cannot make a motion because I work with TAG. Is there any interest by the members to make a motion?
I will.
I'll make a motion.
Go for it, Jose.
Make a motion to approve funding for Sunset STPG. Requested.
Second.
Third.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, thank you. If I could please request a voice vote. For the recommendation to TPC programming of supplemental fiscal year 22 federal STBG funding. Make it an aye. Votes for aye. Yes.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any votes for nay?
No.
Okay, Robin, thank you. With that, motion passes and we move on to agenda item 3. Thank you. I would like to take this moment and just recognize that Jason Bahi has joined us. Jason, thank you for joining us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is number 4, the overview of the NOFA programming for federal CRISA funds, jurisdictional requests received, and the compliance report. Thank you. Next slide, please. The supplemental NOFA overview. The NOFA that was made available on June 25th, 2001, the focus was to continue the regional funding priorities. $5,910,000 of Highway Infrastructure Program, or HIP, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021, also known as CRISTA funding, is made available to the region. 4 requests were received by the July 19th deadline. Attachment B includes a summary table, and C includes the funding requests and additional materials provided in your agenda packet. Next slide, please. Programming of the federal funds should also continue to prioritize the delivery of existing RTA projects, i.e. those with existing IGAs and already approved RTA scope and are eligible for supplemental funding to be approved by the RTA board. Preference is given to projects already federalized and that can use the available funding. The TPC subcommittee is asked to determine which projects are eligible and consistent with the NOFA. The recommended projects will be considered by the RTA board along with specific funding amounts for programming via an IGA amendment with the RTA. Next slide, please. The first project, which was submitted for HIP CRISA funding, is tip number 10.18, Sunset Road, I-10 to River. The jurisdiction is Pima County. Pima County has also requested $5,910,000 of CRISA funding to be programmed in fiscal year 22 for the construction phase. Project descriptions and narratives can be located in attachment C. The eligibility considerations that were outlined in the NOFA include existing RTA roadway elements. The project needs supplemental funding to be completed. The project is federalized and has an active IGA for design. This project appears to meet all of the funding requirements, all of the NOFA requirements, excuse me. Next slide, please. Tip number 90.12, UA 2nd Street Bike and Pedestrians Improvements, was submitted by Jennifer Toothaker with the City of Tucson. The city has requested CRISA funding in the amount of $566,248 for fiscal FY22 for phase construction. You can also review this project in attachment C of your agenda packet. This project should also be considered against the RTA, the NOFA eligibility requirements or considerations. One, that it is an existing RTA project, needs supplemental funding to be completed. There's currently 6,000 of RTA funds that have been committed for local match on a previously approved STBG funding for 105,000. This project is federalized and there's no current IGA on this project. Thank you. Next slide, please. TID number 32.15, Bike Boulevard Package 1 was also submitted by the City of Tucson. Their CRISA funding request was $3,107,256. The fiscal year which they have made this request was for fiscal year 23. And the project phase it was not clear to me, and I will ask the applicant to discuss that in just a moment. Project description and additional narratives, again, please reference attachment C. The eligibility considerations for this project, which met the outline as discussed in the NOFA. Okay, this appears to be a non-RTA related scope element of a previously funded package of projects to improve pavement conditions and not the delivery of an RTA project. Currently, this project is not federalized. Next slide, please. The next funding request was not correlated with a TIP number, nor were we able to clarify an RTA categorical number. However, the project name is El Paso and Southwestern Greenway, Kino to University, St. Mary's Road to Cushing Street. This was submitted by the City of Tucson Department of Mobility. And their CRISA request for this project was $1,719,906 for fiscal year 23 for the construction phase. Again, if you should choose, please reference attachment C. The eligibility considerations against the NOFA for this project currently has an approved or existing RTA scope. It does need supplemental funding to be completed. The project is not federalized, and there appears to not be an IGA for this segment. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, with that, I would like to open the floor for any questions from our subcommittee members.
Carolyn, this is Anna. I have a couple of questions.
Sure, Anna.
One of them, and I don't remember this in the note, but this CRISA money, can it be programmed in later years, or does it have to be programmed for fiscal year 22?
There are 2 years that are available for CRISA funding. I believe that's 22 and 20. I'm sorry, 23 and 24. Jamie, can you catch me on that one, please?
Thank you. Yeah, just to verify, I was looking at the NOFA, and I believe it's fiscal years 22 and 23 in which we're making these funds available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie.
And then the other thing wasn't clear is, so with the STPG that we just approved a little while ago, that'll go to TPC for review and approval.
Yes.
Will this federal money go to TPC for review and approval as well?
This process or this agenda item will follow the RTA review process. It will not move forward to the TPC. And the reason being is we wanted to meet the requirements of, as stated previously with RTA funding and the regional board, but also we wanted to ensure that there was proper review by the RTA side of the house and ultimately availability for an IGA.
So wait, this will not be reviewed by the TPC, but the other one will?
Yes, that's my understanding.
My understanding was that the MPO side of the house, so the PAG side of the house, needed to approve all regional funding, which would include federal or the 12.6 that we get here in Arizona. and that the RTA board was limited to RTA revenues. So I'm confused how this doesn't get approved through the PAG side of the house.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So the NOFA requested that there were some items that were outlined so that we could move them forward in a process that we're all a little more comfortable with. The RTA, this item wasn't quite as clear with the applications. With some of the applications weren't quite as clear. So we wanted to make sure that the opportunity was open for all of the applicants.
But may I ask, I mean, per like the US code, it is the MPO side of the house that needs to program federal funds. And that is not the RTA side of the house. Is that correct?
I'd like to.
If I may, and that's a great question. My understanding is that ultimately it will be programmed by through an amendment process consistent with our regional council adopted TIP policies and procedures. So if it were to go to the RTA board and be approved there, it would then be eligible for an administrative amendment consistent with those regional council approved policies and procedures.
PAG Regional Council, and yet none of the PAG subcommittees will have seen it other than this one?
We were asking the TIP subcommittee to recommend the projects that move forward.
I think there's an IGA process, and that's the issue. That if there are IGA issues, if it doesn't exist, or if it's a new project requested under the RTA, regardless of the fund source, then that has to be considered through the RTA board. Jim will have to clarify this. Then the IGA process is done. And then there's the MOU with the regional council. That is the relationship there, as I understand it. I may not be unmuddying things.
I will say this seems like a unique process again. I know traditionally funding would be programmed in the TIP and the IGA follows. I understand we're kind of in a strange situation with partially funded projects, but it does funding that is regional funding would funnel through the PAG side of the house. But sorry, Jim.
Yeah, from my standpoint,
It makes it
I don't,
very
I don't have an issue or a problem with this going through TPC. We would need to go through an RTA process as well to deal with the IGA aspects of it.
Just like the SPG we just.
That's my experience. Everything in the TIP reported to a TPC.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I mean, usually we don't start an IGA process if there's nothing programmed for the project. I mean, so usually programming comes before the IGA, and now you're asking the IGA to come before the programming, and that gets really crazy to me.
I think this was unique in the sense that they're looking for RTA projects that are ready to go. Because in the past, you're absolutely right. We submitted our project request, and if it gets approved, the next step is you get MOU or you get an IGA.
So all of
This one's a little unique in the sense that it was an OFA for RTA projects. They want to get those projects out the door. That's my understanding. That's the reason why we looked at it. None of us, well, at least Orval doesn't have RTA projects. So we focus on that you guys that have the big projects move forward.
But clearly, I mean, you know, ours were all small projects, but they were all RTA projects. The El Paso and Southwestern Greenway is an RTA project because it goes all the way from Keno to University. And the previous segments of it had RTA and federal funding. So it's sort of a misnomer on that particular one to say it's not federally funded because, you know, the other previous segments were. And I suspect that because we used RTA funding, I'm sure, to design the one that's on the list today, that there is something with the RTA that allows us to have designed that section that we're asking for money for. The other one, the Second Street, has RTA funding associated with it, but because we put a hold on the design, we hadn't processed the IGA. The reason we put a hold on that design is because it was a federal design approved by the region. And if we don't get funding for the construction, the region gets to pay that money back that we use. So we put a hold so that we would minimize the damage, right? So what I'm concerned about is because of these new rules, we're going to be on the hook, we as a region, for the funding that we expended to design something that we had reason to believe would be funded for construction through the region. And I just don't see how this process helps us in that case. The second avenue one can cost us money. And I just want to know, so will someone please outline to me the entire process, because I used to understand it and now I do not. So please describe for me how exactly this process works for at least these two funding sources, and who approves what at what time.
Okay, I'll take a stab at it, and then we'll see if I need some additional support. So this portion of the NOFA, we're discussing the CRISA funds. We requested that the NOFA, in the NOFA, that there were projects that had previous IGAs associated with them, that they met the federal requirements for being federalized project, that they were a named RTA project with and had a tip number. That was another item that we were hoping to see or wanting to see, because they were already programmed into the fiscal year 22 to 26 tip. So we wanted to also give the tip review subcommittee the opportunity to review all of the applications that were submitted under that NOFA. We were requesting that the NOFA asked for roadway project elements. We really felt like that was outlined. And so roadway elements, existing federal funds, IGAs would be recommended, hopefully be recommended to move forward to the TPC. And on the RTA side of the house, I'll ask Jim if he can ask your question on that piece, on that process. I think we talked about that earlier.
Colonel, just a quick question. How were these criteria generated? Who came up with these? I mean, was it the RTA board or was it the council? Council, sorry.
We used RTA policy for funding the projects to come, the voter approved projects. That's the priority. We want to try to get those funded.
Letters out from the,
Can you walk through the policy items that generated this process, please?
Sure. I believe that those were located in partially located as attachments to the agenda. And those are, let's see, there are 3 memos that are there, and they kind of outline the policies that we use to develop the NOFA. Do you have the packet?
I have the packet. I'm not sure how those.
it's letters from the chairs from the various.
Yeah, but
just a clarification. Were the NOFAs, to Jose's question, did any committee, whether at RTA board, regional council, actually discuss the packaging of these NOFAs, or it was PAG and RTA staff assembling it from these different correspondents?
It was PAG and RTA staff.
And it's assembled from the
policy.
But it says this from but the only thing on here is memos. There's no policy attachment.
I believe that those memos reference the policy.
Do policies have to be approved by a policy committee, or are they the opinion of the chair of those committees? I don't know how that's written into your bylaws.
Yeah, they appear to be opinions. Based upon my reading of them, they are opinions of these chairs.
So my understanding is that the regional board sets policy for the region. We're following the regional council's direction.
Can
Jamie,
you discuss
anything else on that?
Thanks, Carolyn. I mean, yeah, as Carolyn referred to the kind of the fact sheet associated with the supplemental NOFA, as well as the memos that outline the priorities and commitments for the RTA plan. And so in terms of those specific policy questions that you're asking, I don't know if Jim would prefer to answer those and how those are documented and referenced, but I think we have clear direction from the elected leaders on the RTA board in terms of how they'd like us to program those dollars. Mr. DeGroot, do you have any?
I just would add that this dates back to the 2014 actions by the RTA board, and which is also the regional council. And the executive director has put forth the NOFA with our, we've developed it internally to be in conformity with the direction that was given to us back in 2014. That's
that mean for the SBA?
that is how we're trying to, that is how we've identified the priorities with this batch of NOFAs. We do have other NOFAs that have gone out as well for the RTA side, and those we will be dealing with in a different process. But in terms of the federal money is to go through the PAC process.
So, but the 2014 regional council said that everything should go back to the TIP subcommittee. And so I'm confused as to then why the RTA funding won't go to the TIP subcommittee. So in some cases we are following regional council, but in other cases we are not. And where does that dividing line exist?
Well, we've put the NOFA out, and we're looking to follow the NOFA as it's written.
But the one that we're talking about in the future, that's for the RTA funds, the uncharted area where we have more money.
The RTA
We're going to be on the ballot amount.
We'll be dealing with that separate.
That's the reason why it's new. I think going back to the agenda here. It's been late here. So what, are we going to vote on these projects, or Carolyn, remind me, what are we doing here? I mean,
Thank you, Jose. So
these projects meet the criteria, or which one did not meet the criteria? Shed some light on this.
So we're looking for a recommendation from the TPC subcommittee to move projects forward that they felt met the NOFA. I provided an overview of those items and the ones that met and ones that perhaps didn't fully meet the intent. And we would like to give the TIP subcommittee the opportunity to recommend eligible projects that are consistent with the NOFA requirements for further consideration for funding by the RTA board.
Hey, Carolyn?
Yeah.
Could you bring the back up, please? The project request?
Sure.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to begin at the beginning of the Pima County request?
Of course.
Thank you. So the eligibility considerations on the right, the ones that are bulleted, outline what the NOFA requested. And so in this slide, Pima County's request for sunset appears to meet the eligible considerations. I just want to mention again that we're requesting that the subcommittee make those determinations, and I am not leading you in any way. We just want to follow the NOFA and the eligibility considerations. So there are a couple of options moving forward with this, Jose. Per your question, we could, as a committee, address each project with a yay or a nay, or we could complete a roll call towards the end of the meeting should a motion be made to recommend for approval the following items, or and the TIP subcommittee does not recommend for approval. It's kind of up to the committee on how you'd like to proceed here. I want to just open the floor to that conversation.
I'd like to see at least each project, and the committee can decide whether yes, it has the criteria and move forward, and then we can consider it at the end. But let's look at all. Is it the, was it 4 projects?
Yeah, okay.
And
Would
then
you like me
maybe we
to?
can say, yeah, that one looks like it needs to work out.
Okay,
And we can rate each one of whether they get the money or not. It's up to the committee.
I second that idea.
thank you. Let's see here. Okay, so the first project for consideration for funding is tip number 10.18, Sunset Road, I-10 to River Road. Would the tip subcommittee like to move this proposal forward? Shall we do a voice vote?
So if we do them one at a time, this uses all the money and we're done, right?
No, Robin. So that's, I believe that the funding, we're just speaking strictly on whether the project should move forward for further consideration.
Right.
Thank you for that clarification. That's a good question.
Whether they meet the terms of the
Eligibility.
Yes, that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're trying to do.
And this is COVID relief, so this meets the eligibility for CRISA as well. And what are the CRISA items that were included in the NOFA?
So circling back, back to RTA policy, we're working on funding the roadway projects, and we also have these projects that were submitted, and it's up to the TIP subcommittee if they meet the outline of the NOFA and if they should move forward.
So there's no federal requirement for this to be in any way related to COVID relief?
We talked about the projects being federalized.
I think Robin is asking, was there any other
Yeah, but I mean,
specific
what does it mean?
criteria?
It's a project,
Because
COVID
it's a
relief.
COVID relief
It's
fund.
free
Yeah,
federal.
that is correct. Thank you, Anna.
whatever you want to think
Well,
of.
Anybody know?
Everybody's got their own interpretation of what COVID relief is.
Jamie.
If I may, so
Good, Keith, you want to say?
I want to say, so we've got money that has been given directly to our jurisdictions for this as well. And we're struggling internally with this type of funding, but the only thing that's truly named is wet utility infrastructure in this. So none of these projects or this PAG or RTA is not programming for wet utilities. So
Right.
we're gonna spend it on roads.
Right. I just wondered because CRISA for us internally as a community has a different set of requirements. I just want to verify that because I saw nothing in the NOFA about that.
if I may, Carolyn, just to jump in. So in the NOFA, we did include a link to a guidance memo from the US DOT on eligibility for HIP, Highway Improvement Program, CRISA funding. And so we encouraged everyone to read that carefully. There's a lot of detail in there about eligibility. And that was actually one of the requirements of the applications as well, is to discuss the eligibility, how each project meets the eligibility requirements. So we're happy to follow up after this meeting and share the link again to that memo. But it refers to the Surface Transportation Program requirements as well, because they're very similar. But I believe we did link to that guidance memo in the NOFA.
And we did read through that. I was just wondering what your interpretation is, because your interpretation of the 2014 Regional Council is somewhat different than mine.
Understand, Robin. So what we're looking for from the TIP subcommittee is if these projects meet the eligibility consideration and if they should move forward for further review. That's all. Our goal was to allow the.
Yeah, we're just saying, yeah, that meets the criteria set on the NOFA. So yeah, that we're gonna move forward. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Speaking of.
Second.
So 10.18, Human County Sunset Road, we'll move forward. The next slide, please. Okay, the next one is tip ID 90.12, U of A 2nd Street bike and pedestrian improvements.
So this being a city of Tucson, I would just say that the reason no IGA has been processed, I think I covered this territory before, was because we put a hold on the design in order not to expend regional funds that will have to be paid back. So I would say that because there was not an ability to move forward with an IGA prior to this NOFA, that I would prefer this move forward, because I really don't want the existing funding that has already been expended on the planning to be something that we as a community have to pay back because the construction was not completed. And there is a firm deadline on that. It will have to be paid back in this coming year. So
it might be helpful for the committee if you could provide a quick kind of outline. Perhaps not everyone is familiar with this project as maybe you and I are.
Yeah, so this project was a transportation alternatives project that went through a subcommittee approval to design. It was U of A and City of Tucson together going in with it to design it, with the understanding that there would be another subcommittee later to approve TA projects for construction. We went ahead thinking that the whole thing could be done through the normal process, including going back through for construction once the NEPA and all that was all completed. We got almost done with the NEPA, understood suddenly that there was no construction funding available any longer that wasn't in a named project, and stopped design. We're almost done with the NEPA. We have a little bit more in the program that we've moved into next fiscal year. We have had a discussion with ADOT, and if we can come up, we as a region come up with the funding for construction, then they will not require us to pay that design money back. So at this point in time, the region has approved federal funding for design. We have expended a portion of it, and that portion will have to be paid back if this does not get construction funding. So to me, it's in the region's best interest to spend this small amount of CRISA to make sure that we as a region do not have to pay that funding for the approved design, regionally approved design, back to the feds.
There an MOU on this project?
So we are a CA agency, so we started it as a federal project, and then the RTA matching funds got added when the new STP got added. And so because we put the project on hold, we did not complete an IGA.
Or an MOU. So there's no regional funds?
There are some RTA funds that have been programmed. It's for 6,000 and
Just programmed, they haven't been expended.
correct.
Because we put it on hold.
What about regional funds, 12.6 STP, any of those funds?
STP has already been expended, and STP is currently in.
Regional funds have been expended on this project.
Regional STP.
Regional funds, you're supposed to have an MOU. Was that changed too?
This project's from 2012. It was probably
that was
2014.
That's around that time when MOUs were. Yeah.
It predated an MOU, and it went on hold then before we would have done an MOU.
Robin, can I ask how much the design was? You said you haven't spent all that design dollars now. About how much would have to be refunded?
Jen, do you have that exact amount?
It's in the area of about 100,000.
Would have to be refunded?
Would have to be, yeah, we'd have to write a check to the feds or ADOT. Actually.
I mean, I think this project meets what was outlined in the NOFA. It's federalized. It is an RTA categorical project. For the purpose of saying, does it meet the criteria? Yes, I think it meets the criteria.
I'm looking at the IGA, but yeah, we can overlook that. But yeah, it was well explained why we're doing it here. All right.
And then Jason, I do see that your hand is raised.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Robin how, or even the committee, how long it would take for an IGA to be processed. You know, this project looks like it meets all the requirements except for that last one.
You know, the only difficulty with processing an IGA is these meetings that we have with both like the subcommittees and the and the regional council are sporadic and not well scheduled. So it would be based completely on the schedule because we could put something together pretty quick.
I would add staff is prepared to work with the jurisdictions on coming together with the language. Generally, we can process something as rapidly as 4 weeks if it's clean and we've got a board agenda that's timely.
Well, I would move that we move forward with this project, contingent on the IGA being processed.
Thank you, Jason.
I second the motion.
Thank you, Gallo.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Okay, can I get a voice vote for moving this project forward for consideration?
Aye.
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 Okay, any nays? Okay, great, thank you. This project will move forward. Tip number 90.12. The next project for consideration is tip number 32.15, Bike Boulevard Package 1 and the City of Tucson. Robin, I have the eligibility considerations up on the screen. Would you like to discuss this project?
Right. I mean, this one is obviously not federalized. That's why we went for 23. We figured it's pretty easy, in all honesty, to federalize pavement preservation, and everything in this project is between the curbs. So it would be a pretty straightforward NEPA process. It's Bike Boulevard Package 1, which is definitely an RTA programmed project in the TIP. And we have come to the conclusion that bike boulevards on roads that are full of potholes are less than entirely adequate. So this is an attempt to ensure that not only do we build the bike boulevard accoutrements, but also pave it so that the bikes can actually use it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Robin on this one?
If I may, this is Jen. I just wanted to add a note. What we found with our Prop 407 connections projects through a lot of feedback from the community is that pavement preservation on those bike boulevards is something that people are demanding. And for us at the City of Tucson, full completion of a bike boulevard project done through Prop 407 is it's considered complete when we actually are also doing the pavement treatment. And just wanting to kind of extend that into consideration for this Bike Boulevard Package 1, given that we will be able to do 3 different project areas with this with the funding. The pavement preservation will help complete it, if you will, in the public's eyes. It's not just our desire to see this done. It's actually a community request and demand.
Thank you, Jen. Okay. Would the TIP subcommittee like to recommend eligibility for this project? Anyone like to make a motion?
Well, of course, I'd like to move it forward.
Thank you, Robin. Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Gallo. Is there any further discussion? Okay. I'd like to request a voice vote for yay, yes?
Yay.
Yes.
Okay. For nay?
Nay.
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 Okay.
So this project will not move forward for further consideration. Next slide, please. Okay, the final project for review today is project name El Paso on Southwestern Greenway, Keno to University, St. Mary's Road to Cushion Street. This is a segment of the project that I'm not sure we could find a direct correlation in the RTA categoricals. Generally, they seem to be listed, and we had some challenges locating the correlation on this one. If you'd like further information, please review attachment C. The eligibility considerations are shown, and Robin or Jen, would either of you like to provide a little information on this portion of the discussion?
So the El Paso and Southwestern Greenway Keno to University, the whole entire project, and in a past iteration of the TIP was in its entirety, the entire segment was federalized. It had a federal planning document and went all the way to university. So it has been federalized in that way. The entire thing has been federalized in that way. It, the design and of this particular segment did have RTA funding that we expended on it as part of a TIP item that I don't have anymore because it's not in the budget anymore, but it was noted as El Paso and Southwestern Greenway Keno to University because it was designed for the entire stretch. It was an RTA project. There's funding for a different segment in 2020 and two different segments in 2020. But there was originally, like I said, an entire, so it was an RTA scope and project because the entire scope was funded with RTA/federal funding all the way from Keno to university. So it is a shared use path and trail. And so it is part of the greenways sort of item in the PAG or in the RTA. So for this segment, it is true that no IGAs are active, but for the overall El Paso and Southwestern Greenway, from Keno to University, there have been at least several IGAs. So at this point in time, we wanted to try to complete the entire project. I know it's not a named project in the RTA plan under the roadway because clearly it is a multi-use / sidewalk / bikeways type of project.
Thank you, Robin. That's a very helpful description of the project. Do the TIP subcommittees members have any further questions for Robin?
So the one thing I would add is if the committee wanted to put forward a smaller amount, we could also attempt to fund pieces of it ourselves. So anyway, I'm looking at environmental economic vitality element number 41, greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks as the RTA element.
Thank you. And just as a quick reminder, we're at this level, we're recommending that projects move forward for further consideration and funding amounts. So either we move the project forward as a committee or we do not.
I'd like to move the project forward.
Thank you, Robin. Is there a second?
I'll go and second it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion?
This is Doug from ADOT. Just wanted to comment a portion of this, does fall along the I-10 frontage road, and the district is in support of and excited to work with the city on the section that does fall along our right of way.
Thank you, Doug. So we do have a motion and a second. We've had discussion, and now I would like to ask for a voice vote from the committee. Can I hear the yes votes or yay?
I have one more comment. I think it might be, it might be tip 83.07. But anyway, aye.
Thank you, Robin. We'll look into that. Okay.
Also being 72.07, because both of those are titled that same overall. But there is an older one also. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you. We'll go back to the ayes or yes. I did think I heard one. Are there others?
Aye.
Okay. For the nays? Are there nay votes?
Come on, guys, speak up.
Nay.
No.
Nay.
Nay.
Okay. So this project will not be moving forward to the next step. Now, if we could please go back to the next slide, please, or go forward to the next slide for recommendation. Okay. We request that the TIP subcommittee recommend eligible projects consistent with the NOFA requirements for further consideration for funding by the RTA board. The committee has approved to move forward tip number 10.18 and tip number 90.12 to be considered. Can I get a motion first on this?
I have a question. Do we need to fiscally constrain this? Because right now we would be recommending more than the available funding.
So just to circle back, we're not recommending any funding dollar amounts at this point. We're recommending the projects to be considered to move forward to the next level.
And can we clarify, will the next level be the TPC?
On this project, it will not be the TPC. On these projects, there will not be the TPC.
I thought we discussed earlier,
can
we're
recommend
going to put the federal projects through the TPC.
Would you like to include that in your recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
Make a motion.
I'll move that the two projects we discussed, tip ID 10.18 and 90.12, be gone to the TPC.
Second.
Okay, a first and a second. Can I hear a voice vote for the remainder? Votes for yay?
Yay.
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 Okay, thank you. So action item moves forward to the next level. Thank you all. Let's move on to number 5, adjournment. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks. Bye.
We skipped those.